Hey everybody, it's Scott Detweiler here. Today I want to talk about exposure. Now, there's a lot of correct and incorrect information wandering around about exposure, and I want to clear up some of that so that when you're doing this, it makes complete sense and it's not a guessing game, because your camera only works one way. And you can have a lot of artistic license as to what you want the ending image to look like, but realistically you have to play within the bounds of the physics involved inside the camera. Once you understand what that is, it becomes a lot easier to properly expose an image. So I'm going to use a picture here that I took a couple of weeks ago, and it's not the final version. This is the straight out of camera mistake. And the reason this is a mistake is this image is underexposed. And I can tell by looking at the histogram. Now, the back of your camera shows a histogram. A lot of you probably have it disabled, don't know how to get to it. You really need to be married to this thing. I chimp the back of the camera or look at the back of the camera after a shot to see if someone has blinked, to see if the background is okay, and so on, but I'm looking to see if the histogram is correct. Once you have the histogram properly exposed, as long as the model's position or distance from the lights do not change, then the histogram is not going to change. Then you can continue doing your shoot and not having to worry about if things are properly exposed. You can focus on composition, blinks, and so on. So the reason we know this is underexposed is because we're missing everything on this side of the histogram. So you see this histogram here is separated into 4 zones. Now forget this gray highlighting thing that Lightroom is trying to do, but you see the 4 lines. There's one here, here, and here. This represents the brightest part of the image, this side of the histogram here. And the way that your digital camera, all digital cameras store memory, is that half, mind-blowing as it is, half of the image data is stored in this first stop. So this picture is smaller, significantly smaller on my chip. That also means that later on, if I want to manipulate this image, I'm missing half of the image data. That's pretty significant. So I need to make sure that my images are properly exposed and that as much of the image as I can get is in the brightest part. Now, what if you want a dark and moody image? Okay, that's fine. You can always darken it later, but brightening it is the same as inventing data. And because you can't invent data that isn't there, Lightroom, Photoshop, and other editing tools simply add information based on what they see in their best attempt to come up with what is missing. Typically, and in darker areas, that means noise, because there's really not a lot of information there, so it just kind of sprinkles random values or takes the inherent differences between the pixels in your cameras and amplifies and magnifies them, making it more problematic. So when you properly expose your images, make sure that you have data in here. Now, you don't want to clip against this far edge, because that means that you're beyond the capabilities of your camera's memory to store that information. There is a little bit of leeway when you shoot RAW, however, that you can recover about another half a stop off to the right-hand side. Now, the same goes to the left-hand side, or the black side of the histogram. Half the data is here, a quarter of the data is here, an eighth of the data is here, and a 16th of the data is here. So we don't have a lot of information on this side, but this image is inherently dark. So there will always be a spike in the dark side of the histogram. Nothing you can do about that. And the old adage goes, there's no such thing as a bad histogram. They all tell a story. But realistically, you want to have your histogram pushed as far to the right as possible. Thus the term shoot to the right. So if I had shot this image correctly, I would have pushed it up to about here. So I'm 2 stops underexposed. Now you may be thinking, wow, she's kind of blown out here, and maybe I can't see her tattoo that well. That's something that should have been resolved with makeup. She could have been powdered a bit. I could have used a gobo to block part of the light against her shoulder, rotate the softbox differently. These are all things, by the way, that I did after I saw the bad exposure and I fixed it. So you need to see what is wrong with the image, and it's not that properly exposing the images causes it to be improper. You need to fix why a properly exposed image may not be ideal. Now, when we're all said and done, you may think, well, I really want this image to be darker and moodier. That's fine, but some part of this image should probably occupy the upper part of the tonal range of the image. So if we look at this image in black and white, you see that this image spans the entire from black all the way to the brightest white across our histogram. This is what I consider to be a properly exposed and value-laden image. It is all the values. The histogram is nice and wide. If you have a flat histogram, things just tend to look terrible. So in it's hard to do this inside of Lightroom because it's got kind of this like idiot-proof thing going on. But if we flatten our histogram, flatten our curve. I just want to remove this stupid point. Sometimes this thing drives me nuts. If we flatten it, you see how everything kind of goes 18% gray. This is what your camera is always trying to do, is make an image that's 18% gray. So if you look at the histogram, it's spiked in the middle. That means that this image is flat, obviously, and you can see that visually this image is flat. This shows your image is flat. So if you take a picture and you've got a big spike in the middle and you aren't getting anything on either side, your image is approaching 18% gray. Well, that's not pleasant, even if it's in color. So don't be taken back by the fact this is black and white. It's going to look crappy in color as well. So as we widen our histogram up top, and just look at the histogram. I mean, the curve I'm using is a tool to show you what happens as you widen it. Notice that the image becomes more interesting because now we have some blacks that are actually becoming black or approaching black, and some whites that are actually approaching white. So a properly exposed image should use the entire tonal range of the histogram. Ah, stupid stick down there. Oh, this is why I don't do curving inside of this product. Anyway, so this image is 2 stops underexposed. So that's bad. And noting that when I see it, I metered my light wrong. I had my ISO set on my camera below normal. Maybe I had my f-stop too aggressive. Shutter speed won't become an issue because I'm using strobes here, not natural light. So as long as I'm within my sync speed, which would be obvious because there'd be a black bar at the bottom of the image, that the f-stop or ISO are one of the 2 things that are a problem. Or I have to turn my light up. You know, it's either too far from the model or it's not as powerful as it should be. So what either the case is, this is 2 steps underexposed. So this image, albeit dark and moody, is not the image I should shoot. This is the image I should shoot. And if I choose to later, I could always make it dark and moody. But in my opinion, this is now starting to approach what I call muddy. A muddy image is one where there is no real bright spot. It's kind of all approaching the same blah. And this happens as people raise the shadows or bring the black points up in image. This image it's fine, but it's muddy. It's starting to look kind of all about the same tonal value. And in black and white, it's the same thing. This needs to be widened. So in my opinion, this image is a poor exposure, should have been shot in brighter. If I'm going to work with this image, I would probably just pull up the highlight slider. Now it is still dark and moody, but now it is properly exposed. So to me, this is a good solution inside of Lightroom, is to play with the highlight slider. You can do the same thing. You can make the image suck a lot too if you bring it up here and then pull your highlights down. This image is now it's properly exposed, but it's missing a little bit of life. It has gotten rid of the issue I had with the brightness on the skin, but I would want to introduce contrast in the image. And when you do this, you need to lower your saturation or your vibrance. And now it's starting to look really crappy. I mean, your skin is not taking this treatment well. So you're kind of creating all these situations, or now you're trying to solve it by messing with sliders and stuff, and everything's just going to hell. So the correct solution is properly expose the image, and then you can introduce contrast and push it around a bit if you need to. But to rescue this one, I would simply push the highlights up. Because I guess in the end of the day, what I want you to know is that your images should span the total range capable of your camera. Remember that your eye spans a much larger range than this. So you're trying to produce an image that is pleasing to the eye. And if you're not even using part of this, then images tend to look kind of uninteresting and bland. And if you like this, that's fine. But it's because the highlights are still somewhat there. Again, I don't feel this is properly exposed. And if you want to pop this more, I would take it into Photoshop and do what we call a soft light treatment to it to pop this so it is properly exposed. Maybe the darkest areas stay the darkest areas. Lightroom is not an ideal tool for this, but it's ideal for me showing you what this needs to look like. So don't want to belabor the point, but I guess I got to pound it into some heads, is that this image is not what you would be looking for in the back of your camera. It would be this one. And then taking this as the point of departure and lowering the slider in here to get maybe the image you're looking for, you'll have twice as much data, meaning you'll have half the noise, and everything will look a lot better at the end of the day. So I kind of wanted to impress upon you that watching your histogram is an extremely important thing when you start to shoot, making sure that everything is properly exposed, resolving issues with glare or sheen on skin, with powder, gobos, and so on, to try and get the exposure where it needs to be so that the camera's memory can be optimal. You want to walk away with the biggest possible file, rich with as much data as you can have. So when you get home and you pop that thing into Lightroom or Photoshop to mess with it, you can darken it without fear of, further limiting your data, or even brighten it a bit if you need to, because you have a lot more data to work with. Therefore, a lot less noise will be generated. So I hope that was helpful. If you have questions, feel free to leave them in the comments and let me know if there's a video that you would be interested in seeing from what I do, from my techniques and so on. But I'm trying to keep these on the basics, not go too heavy into the editing, because that you can lose a lot of people. This is good for anybody with a digital camera that's trying to shoot something and know whether or not they're shooting a muddy image or a properly exposed image. So I'll catch you next time.